The mountains remember everything. Two girls vanished here, leaving only a photograph and questions that cut deeper than grief. 5 years later, the earth gives up part of the truth, but the rest still sleeps beneath the trees. The morning light in Durango was sharp and golden, painting the San Juan Mountains in a way that made them look almost unreal. Sophie Hale tightened the strap of her backpack, her excitement barely contained. Beside her, Lena Brooks adjusted her sunglasses, half smile tugging at her lips. The two had been inseparable since middle school, the kind of friends who finished each other's sentences and kept each other's secrets. Ethan, Sophie's 19-year-old brother, leaned against the porch railing, holding his phone up. "Hold still, you two," he said with a grin. Lena threw an arm around Sophie's shoulders, and Sophie laughed, the kind of laugh that tilted her head back, catching the sun. The shutter clicked. It would be the last photograph ever taken of them. Claire Hale stood in the doorway, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug she'd forgotten to drink from. Watching them, she couldn't shake a flicker of dread that stirred low in her stomach. There was no reason for it. The day was bright, the trail they'd chosen was popular, and both girls knew the mountains well. But as Sophie waved goodbye, Claire felt an unexplainable pull, as if some invisible thread was tugging her back from letting them go. Hours later, when the sun dipped behind the ridges, Claire began checking the time. By 8 o'clock, she'd sent Sophie a quick text. "Home soon?" No reply. By 9, she was calling both Sophie and Lena. Straight to voicemail. At 10, she dialed Ethan, who was still at a friend's house. "Maybe they lost service," he said, trying to sound calm. But Claire could hear the tremor in his voice. By midnight, the house was filled with the sound of her pacing, the steady, rhythmic creak of floorboards under her bare feet. Each minute stretched unbearably long. She stood by the front window, peering out at the darkened street as if the two girls might suddenly appear, laughing, tired, but safe. They never did. When morning came, Claire was already at the sheriff's office, clutching the photo Ethan had taken. The bright smiles in it felt like a cruel joke now, a frozen moment of joy on the edge of something unthinkable. And somewhere in the San Juan Mountains, the trail that began so innocently had already gone cold. By dawn, the San Juan Mountains were no longer just a backdrop. They were a search grid. Uniformed deputies, park rangers, and volunteers fanned out from the trailhead, their voices echoing Sophie's and Lena's names into the thin morning air. Helicopters circled above, the steady thump of rotor blades carrying farther than any answer ever did. Claire walked alongside a deputy, her eyes scanning every patch of undergrowth. She clung to the belief that the girls might be huddled somewhere, cold but alive. But by midday, a ranger's voice called out over the radios. They'd found something. Near a shallow creek, resting in the mud, lay Sophie's blue backpack, unzipped, one strap torn. A few feet away, a dented aluminum water bottle glistened in the sun. Lena's, judging by the stickers peeling along its sides, but there was no sign of a struggle. No footprints leading away. The trail itself seemed to vanish at the edge of a narrow canyon where the earth dropped sharply into shadows. Below. Back in town, speculation spread faster than the search itself. Some whispered they might have fallen, though no bodies had been found. Others suggested the girls had run away together, chasing some private adventure. A few, in hushed tones, spoke of something darker, a stranger in the mountains. Ethan bristled at every rumor. "They didn't run away," he told anyone who suggested it. "Sophie would have told me." Claire's voice remained quiet but certain. Someone took them. At home that night, she sat at the kitchen table, staring at the damp backpack the deputies had returned to her for identification. She traced the frayed strap with trembling fingers, her mind catching on one thought she couldn't shake. Sophie hated leaving her bag unzipped. Something had forced her to. Across town, Lena's house sat in darkness. Her parents had closed the curtains and spoken to no one. Whatever they knew or feared was locked tightly inside Dot by the third day. The official search began scaling back. And that's when a new name surfaced, a sighting that would change the course of the investigation. The tip came from a couple driving back from Silverton, the afternoon Sophie and Lena disappeared. They'd seen an old, rust-colored pickup parked near the trailhead. A teenage boy sat behind the wheel, engine idling, staring toward the trees as if waiting for someone. When deputies pressed for details, the couple hesitated. Messy dark hair, the woman finally said. Baseball cap pulled low. Could have been 17, maybe 19. Just something about him didn't feel right. The description was vague, but to Ethan, it struck a chord. He knew someone who fitted almost too well, Mason Reed. Mason had once been a familiar face at their high school, a lanky kid with a crooked smile and a reputation for skipping class. He dropped out the previous spring, his name whispered in the hallways mostly in connection with fights or trouble. What most people didn't know was that he and Lena had been close once. Too close, Ethan thought now. He remembered a day, just a few weeks before the hike, when he'd come home to find Mason standing at the bottom of their driveway, his voice raised. Lena was there too, arms crossed, jaw tight. Mason had been pacing, his hands cutting the air in angry gestures. Ethan couldn't hear the words, but he'd caught enough to know it wasn't a friendly conversation. When Mason noticed him watching, his expression shifted, guarded, cold. Lena had quickly muttered something and walked away, refusing to meet Ethan's eyes. At the time, Ethan had told himself it wasn't his business. Now, with the memory resurfacing, it felt like a mistake. The deputies added Mason's name to their notes, their pens moving a little faster. Somewhere in the mix of facts and rumors, a new path was forming, one that led not deeper into the mountains, but into the shadows of the girls' own lives. The mention of Mason's name shifted the investigation's tone. Detectives began speaking to Lena's classmates, teachers, and neighbors, piecing together a side of her life Sophie's family had never seen. One of Lena's friends from art class admitted, after some hesitation, that Lena and Mason had been romantically involved the previous year. It had been brief, kept quiet, and frowned upon by her parents, partly because Mason was older, partly because of his reputation. The relationship ended abruptly, but not before whispers of a possible pregnancy scare had circulated among a few close friends. Whether it was true or just another rumor was unclear, but it was enough to deepen the cloud now hanging over Mason. While police worked these leads, Claire found herself sitting in Sophie's room, searching for anything that investigators might have missed. Tucked between the pages of a worn paperback, she discovered Sophie's diary. The entries from the last month before the hike read differently than the ones before, shorter, sharper, edged with hurt. She cancels on me again. Says she's busy, but I know she's with him. I don't even know if I like the person she's becoming. Another read. We've never fought like this before. Feels like there's a wall between us, and I don't know who put it there, me or her. Claire's hands trembled as she read, feeling the silent fracture that had been growing between the girls. It wasn't just about a boy. It was about trust unraveling piece by piece. When detectives saw the diary, they underlined one entry in particular, the last one Sophie ever wrote. It mentioned Lena meeting someone the day after their argument, someone Sophie wished she'd never see again. Ethan stood in the doorway as they took the diary into evidence. She meant Mason, he said quietly, his voice flat, as if saying it aloud confirmed something he'd been afraid of all along. The officers didn't answer. But the next morning, they turned their focus fully on Mason Reed, only to find He'd already left town. By the end of that summer, Mason Reed had disappeared as effectively as the girls had. Without a body, without physical evidence linking him to their vanishing, the case stalled. Files were boxed up, labeled, and pushed into the unsolved section of the sheriff's archives. For Claire Hollis, time did not dull the ache. It sharpened it. Each day without answers felt like a personal failure. The investigation's stillness became a constant weight in her chest, pressing harder with every passing month. Her marriage cracked under it. Arguments began over nothing, a forgotten errand, a misplaced bill, but always ended in the same raw place, the empty seat at the dinner table where Sophie should have been. One winter night, her husband packed a suitcase and left. He said he couldn't live in a house where every room felt like a grave. Ethan lasted a little longer, but grief gnawed at him in quieter ways. He drifted through jobs, skipped holidays, and finally moved to Denver without much of a goodbye. Calls from him came less and less until Claire could no longer remember the sound of his laugh. Lena's family sold their home and vanished into another state. They sent no forwarding address. Claire suspected they wanted to escape the constant eyes of a town that saw them as the other half of a tragedy. The media, once hungry for every scrap of the story, found newer cases to feed on. Headlines faded. The girls' faces disappeared from newsstands. But for Claire, the search never stopped. Every year, on the anniversary of the hike, she walked the same trail with a flashlight and a notebook, eyes sweeping the ground for anything the police might have missed, a scrap of fabric, a glint of metal. She always returned home with nothing but the sound of wind in her ears. 5 years after the last photo, she made the walk again. This time, a summer storm would roll through the mountains and shift the earth just enough to reveal something. Buried beneath. The storm came without warning. A wall of black clouds rolling over the San Juans, swallowing the peaks. Rain hammered the slopes, turning the soil loose, pulling rocks and branches into shallow slides. By morning, the mountains looked as if they'd been clawed open in places, exposing layers of earth that had been hidden for years. 2 days later, a hiker named Dale Whitman was following an old service road near the eastern ridge, a path he'd taken countless times. The rain had washed away most of the overgrowth, revealing patches of fresh, soft soil. That's when he saw it, something pale and frayed poking out from the dirt. At first, he thought it was litter. But as he stepped closer, the shape became clearer, fabric, weathered and stained, caught under a root. He crouched down, brushing away the loose earth with the back of his hand. His stomach tightened. It wasn't just fabric. He called the sheriff's office, his voice trembling as he gave the coordinates. Within an hour, deputies arrived, followed by crime scene technicians. Yellow tape went up, marking the small patch of disturbed ground. A detective knelt beside the find, pulling on gloves. He tugged gently at the cloth, revealing a worn hiking boot still laced, half buried. The sole was cracked, the leather warped from years underground. They kept digging, shovels cutting into the damp soil. The air grew heavy as the first small fragments of bone emerged, pale against the dark earth. A hush settled over the scene. No one needed to say what they all knew. Back in town, word spread before the remains even reached the coroner. For the first time in years, there was movement in the case. And when forensics confirmed the identity, it would drag every buried suspicion back into the light. The lab results came back faster than anyone expected. The DNA was a match. The remains belonged to Lena Brooks. The news hit the small Colorado town like a winter storm, sweeping through coffee shops, classrooms, and back porches. But the confirmation brought no relief, only sharper questions. Sophie Hale was still missing. The forensic report painted a grim picture. Lena's remains were found lying on her side, one arm bent awkwardly beneath her. Soil analysis showed she'd been buried shallow, her body exposed to cycles of freezing and thawing that had broken her bones over time. But it wasn't the mountain that killed her. A fracture along the back of her skull told a clearer story. Blunt force trauma, delivered with enough strength to silence her instantly. During the excavation, crime scene techs uncovered something else. A tattered scrap of fabric buried just a few inches from her remains. Even after years underground, its faded red and black pattern was unmistakable. It matched the flannel shirt Mason Reed had been wearing in the last known photo of him online, a picture dated the same summer the girls disappeared. Detectives laid the photo beside the fabric in the evidence room. The patterns lined up like pieces of a puzzle. It wasn't proof on its own, but it was enough to shift Mason from a faded rumor back to the center of the case. When Claire heard, she sat in her kitchen staring at the report, her coffee growing cold in her hands. The image of Lena's broken body tangled with memories of Sophie's laughter, and for the first time in years, hope twisted into something darker. Certainty that whoever had hurt Lena had done the same to her daughter. All that remained was finding him and finding Sophie. The rain had stopped by the time Ethan stepped off the bus, but the streets still glistened under the pale afternoon sun. It had been over a decade since he last walked through these roads, and each familiar corner felt like it carried a whisper of the past. He kept his hands deep in his jacket pockets, the weight of his decision pressing heavily against his chest. This visit wasn't for nostalgia, it was for truth. The detectives were waiting in the small, wood-paneled interview room at the station. Keller leaned back, watching Ethan with the quiet scrutiny of someone who knew patience was a weapon. Grace took notes, her pen hovering expectantly. Ethan hesitated, glancing at the window where streaks of water still clung to the glass. "There's something I never told anyone," he began, his voice low. "The day of the hike before everything happened, I saw Lena." He swallowed hard, the image replaying in his mind with sharp clarity. She had been standing outside their house, her shoulders trembling. Her eyes were red, and she was wiping at her cheeks as if trying to erase the evidence of a fight. Across the street, Mason's old truck sat parked, its engine silent but the driver's seat occupied. Ethan remembered. The outline of Mason's cap tilted low. "I thought it was nothing," Ethan admitted. "Just an argument. I was late to meet friends, so I didn't stop. But now," his voice faltered, "now I wonder if that moment, if Mason being there, meant something." Grace's pen stopped moving. Keller leaned forward, his expression sharpening. "You're certain it was that day?" Ethan nodded slowly. Positive. A tense silence settled in the room. Outside, the sound of tires splashing through puddles filled the air. Grace exchanged a look with Keller, an unspoken agreement passing between them. Keller stood, grabbing his coat. "Then our next step is clear." Ethan's heart pounded as Keller's voice dropped to a determined murmur. "We find Mason before he disappears again." Rain slicked the narrow streets as Keller and Grace pushed through the station doors, the chill of the night air cutting straight through Ethan's thin sweater. Mason's name hung in his mind like a curse. He barely remembered the last time he saw him, scruffy, evasive, and always looking over his shoulder. That had been before Mason vanished into whatever shadows swallowed people whole in this town. Keller's car hummed through the wet darkness, wipers swiping in a frantic rhythm. "He won't be at his old address," Keller muttered. Too obvious, but he had a sister in the industrial district, lived above that defunct textile mill. Grace's eyes flicked to him. "If she's still there." They pulled up outside the mill, its tall windows black and rain-streaked. A faint orange glow leaked from an upstairs unit. The building groaned as the wind pressed against it. Ethan's throat tightened. This was where Mason could either give them the truth or make sure they never found it. Inside, the stairwell reeked of mildew. Each creak underfoot echoed up into the shadows. Keller's hand hovered near his holster. Grace's flashlight cut narrow beams into the dark. A door on the third floor stood ajar. Warm light spilled across the hall, and with it came the faint scrape of movement inside. Keller stepped forward and knocked once, firm. The sound of a chair being dragged skittered across the floorboards. Then the door opened just wide enough for one wary eye to peer out. Mason's gaunt face appeared, older and thinner, his beard tangled. His gaze darted past them like a hunted animal's. "Mason," Keller said quietly, "we need to talk. It's about that night." For a heartbeat, Mason seemed ready to slam the door, but then his shoulders sagged. "You don't know what you're asking," he rasped. "If I tell you, you'll wish you never came here." His voice shook not from the cold, but from something buried deep. Grace stepped forward, voice steady but urgent. "People are dead, Mason. If you know who did it, now's the time." The rain outside intensified, rattling the thin glass in the windows. Mason glanced toward the far corner of the room, where a single duffel bag sat zip tight. His fingers twitched toward it. "Everything you're looking for. It's in there," he whispered. Keller moved, but Mason's eyes widened in sudden fear. "Careful," he said, almost pleading. "If they know I talked, it won't just be me. They'll come for all of you." A sudden bang from the hallway made them all flinch. Footsteps, quick and heavy, pounding up the stairs. Mason's expression collapsed into pure panic. "It's too late," he breathed. The cemetery was nearly empty when Clara arrived, the late afternoon sun casting a bruised lavender glow over the marble headstones. The wind carried the faint smell of damp earth, mingling with the soft rustle of wilted flowers left behind by grieving hands. She gripped Sophie's small bouquet, white lily tied with a fraying ribbon, her knuckles pale against the stems. The weight of the years pressed on her shoulders, heavier with every step toward the back corner of the grounds. Sophie's grave was smaller than Clara remembered. Time had dulled the stone, the name almost faded, but the carved date was still. Sharp and unmovable reminder of the day everything fractured. She knelt, placing the lily at the base, her fingertips tracing the cold letters. In the quiet, she imagined Sophie's laughter, the way it used to echo through the kitchen on summer mornings. It struck her how cruel it was that a voice so bright could be silenced so completely. A sound soft, deliberate broke her reverie. Clara turned and saw Mason standing a few yards away, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his coat. His face was unreadable, but his eyes lingered on the grave. She deserved more, he sighed, his voice low. Clara swallowed hard. She deserved the truth. Mason's jaw tightened. "Accidents happen, Clara. No one wanted—" "Don't," she cut in, her voice shaking. "Don't call it an accident when you can't even look me in the eye." The wind picked up, rattling the brittle leaves between them. Mason's gaze dropped, but he didn't speak again. Clara realized then that silence could be its own confession. As he turned and walked toward the gate, Clara stayed by the grave, her pulse echoing in her ears. Beneath the stone, Sophie slept in the cold earth, but in Clara's mind, the girl was still waiting for the truth to be unearthed. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the cemetery, and Clara knew she was closer than ever to pulling them into the light. The town reeled as the news broke, a collective gasp spreading through streets and cafes like a chill wind. Mason, the man many had once trusted, was formally charged with double homicide. The courthouse steps became a stage for whispers and stares. Neighbors who'd once greeted him now crossed the street to avoid eye contact. The betrayal cut deeper than anyone expected, not just for the crimes, but for the years of silence that had allowed them to fester in shadow. Lena's parents, pale and hollow-eyed, refused to attend the trial. They told reporters they couldn't bear to hear the details, to imagine their daughter's final moments replayed in open court. Their home remained shuttered, the blinds drawn tight, as if keeping the world out could keep the memories from spilling in. Ethan sat alone most nights, nursing the heavy guilt that had taken root in his chest. He replayed every conversation with Mason, every strange pause, every moment he could have spoken up but didn't. The truth weighed heavier than any lie. It had the power to save, but it also destroyed. When Claire took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. Her voice didn't waver as she described the photograph. Lena and Mason, side by side, smiling under the late summer sun, the shadows behind them growing long. They hadn't known it would be the last picture ever taken. Claire's words painted a picture too vivid to ignore, and even the judge seemed to lean forward, caught in the spell of her testimony. As she stepped down, a strange quiet settled over the room. Outside, the sky darkened, clouds rolling in as if the weather itself were holding its breath. Tomorrow, the defense would present its case, and with it, a revelation no one saw coming. Months later, Claire returns to the trail alone, her boots crunching softly against the frosted ground. The air is crisp, thinner here, each breath carrying a scent of pine and stone. She walks the familiar path in silence, the same one she had once taken with a team, police dogs, and a heart full of desperate hope. Now the search is over, but the ache is not. When she reaches the clearing where the bodies were found, her steps slow. She kneels on the damp earth, brushing away a layer of pine needles to place a small bouquet of wildflowers, blue and white, the colors they loved. Her fingers linger there as if willing warmth into the cold ground. Leaning forward, she whispers the same promise she has made every year for the last 5. I'll bring you home. Her voice trembles, but the vow feels heavier now, more real, no longer spoken to the wind but to the truth she has finally faced. The mountains loom above, still and unyielding, their ridges casting long shadows that stretch toward her. They hold their secrets as they always have, indifferent, eternal, yet she feels their silent weight like a witness who has seen everything. As the sun dips behind the peaks, the air cools sharply. Claire stands, brushing dirt from her knees, and takes one last look at the place where 2 lives were stolen too soon. In the distance, the wind carries a sound that could almost be laughter or maybe just the rustle of leaves. Turning away, she follows the trail back toward the valley, each step pulling her farther from the mountains but closer to what comes next. Somewhere beyond the tree line, another answer still waits.